Welcome to the 700 Club. It's one of the largest expulsion of migrants since the 1950s. The U.S. is sending tens of thousands of Haitians back home. They flooded our southern border, trying to escape the chaos in their own country.
The Haitian government doesn't want them back. It's asking the United States for a humanitarian moratorium on the deportations. Dale Hurd has the story.
The U.S. is flying Haitians camped in a Texas border town back to their homeland and trying to block others from crossing the border from Mexico. Planes left the airport in Del Rio, Texas. On board, some of the estimated 13,000 people, mostly Haitians, who were living in camps underneath this bridge on the border.
We've never seen anything like this. This is completely and totally out of the norm of anything that we've ever seen.
Crowds so massive they could be seen from far away. The Haitian migrants, who had already been living in Central and South America before converging on the border, do not want to return to their home country, which has been rocked by political violence and natural disasters like the recent earthquake. The White House expects to transfer 3,000 of the migrants away from the bridge by the end of today, saying they'll use a Trump-era health policy which permitted the expulsion of migrants without allowing them to seek asylum.
We have authorities by reason of that special circumstance, and we will exercise those authorities.
The Haitian government does not want them back. The New York Times reports Haiti is asking the U.S. for a humanitarian moratorium on the deportations. But overnight, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas announced 600 more border agents are being sent to Texas to expedite the expulsions. Texas Senator Ted Cruz went to the Del Rio Bridge and tweeted this video of the thousands of Haitians. Border officials are now patrolling the river and stopping migrants from crossing into the U.S., while officials try to prevent a humanitarian disaster under the bridge.
We are bringing additional resources to assist with security, migrant care, transportation, and processing. We are providing food, water, portable toilets, towels. Emergency medical technicians are available for first aid.
The Haitian migrant crisis comes as the border has already been swamped by the highest number of migrants in 20 years, reaching over 200,000 in both July and August. Meanwhile, the Senate parliamentarian has blocked the Democrats' push to include a pathway to legal status for illegal migrants in their social spending plan, a big blow to the party's goal of immigration reform. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, these are absolutely incredible stories that we're hearing about this current administration. And I have to put it out there, I think they're getting an absolute pass from the news media. I've never seen anything like this. And we've been reporting on the migration crisis since April and calling to account, why aren't we enforcing our own border? And that was back when it was 160,000, 170,000 a month. We're now topping 200,000. But here's what happened. You had news media on Friday afternoon covering this, covering with helicopter shots to show the direct link between Mexico, how they're crossing that river right by that spillway and then pooling around underneath that bridge. And the numbers that you could clearly see were enormous. What does the administration do? Well, they institute a no-fly zone. Imagine the Trump administration doing that. What kind of coverage would we see? What kind of outrage would we see from that? And we're not getting any of that. But this isn't the only thing. A sitting U.S. president was censored by the Parliament of Great Britain. Why? Because of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I've never seen that the Parliament would censor a sitting president. Let me add to it, the incoming Chancellor of Germany said the withdrawal from Afghanistan is a watershed event in NATO, that from now on, Germany would recognize that America was in it just to protect their own interest. And that's because of the withdrawal and how it put German citizens at risk inside of Afghanistan. Then let's add to it, for the first time, France has withdrawn their ambassador. That is an earthquake in diplomatic circles, and we're seeing practically no coverage of any one of these events. You add to it the vaccination policy, where we're going to require all employers to either mandate vaccination or weekly tests for every single employee. These things are just absolutely incredible, but there's no coverage. And I'll put it to you. Imagine Trump had done any one of these things. What would have happened? How many news reports, how much screaming on cable news would we have heard? But right now, we're not hearing it. Well, we've got some other news about the administration. Booster shots. Is it recommended for people who've been vaccinated against COVID-19? Well, Ephraim Graham has the latest on this administration dilemma from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, for now, a Food and Drug Administration panel has rejected booster shots for the general population for those who have gotten the PFIZER vaccine. Right now, the booster is just for those over 65 or at high risk of severe COVID. But Dr. Anthony Fauci says the FDA is a few weeks away from making a decision on booster shots for people who've gotten the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health, told Fox News he expects it will become clear in the next few weeks boosters will be necessary because the effectiveness of vaccines diminishes over time. And today, Pfizer said its COVID vaccine is safe and effective for children from 5 to age 11. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is drawing comparisons between the Biden administration and the Good Book, telling CBN News the actions taken so far are unbiblical. Noem making those comments as part of a wide-ranging interview where she discusses her pushback against vaccine mandates, abortion, and the spiritual state of America. Here's CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem says she's ready to fight the Biden administration's recent federal vaccine mandate for private businesses.
What President Biden is doing by these mandates coming down to businesses and employers that employ more than 100 people is unconstitutional. The Constitution clearly states that there are limited powers for the federal government and that all other powers are delegated to the states. So I will, as soon as that guidance comes out, be filing litigation. And I have told the president that I would see him in court.
On the topic of vaccines and science, she lowered the boom on Dr. Fauci. What's your take on Fauci? Do you think he should be fired?
Well, Fauci's done a grave disservice to this country. What he has done is discredited our health officials. He's been political. He's not been consistent. He has not followed the science. Therefore, his credibility is down to zero.
While Noem's praise for Fauci is non-existent, it's the opposite when it comes to Texas's pro-life heartbeat law. It may be controversial, but Noem is taking a stand. Do you want to see a South Dakota law just like Texas? What's your view on that?
Well, we reached out immediately to those who drafted and worked on the Texas law and are consulting with them on how that bill would fit in our statute as well. So yes, I think it was a fantastic win for us.
She also went on the offensive on telemedicine abortions. Biden administration policy allows for women to get abortions without seeing an in-person doctor first. Her executive order did away with that in South Dakota. She says this administration has been ungodly.
What they are doing and the actions they're taking are not biblical. And I know they many times talk about being religious, but I think that it's really time for all of us to look at the actions of our leaders and see if they line up with the Word of God.
Which leads us to the spiritual state of our nation, a stand Noem says is crucial for our nation to survive. Where do you see this fight playing out in America from a spiritual standpoint?
Well, we've seen our society, our culture degrade as we've removed God out of our lives, and people become what they spend their time doing. I really believe that focusing on those foundational biblical principles that teach us that every life has value, every person has a purpose, will recenter our kids and help us really heal this division that we see taking over our country.
It's an uphill battle for sure. David Brody, CBN News.
Another violent weekend in Chicago. At least 6 people killed and 37 wounded in shootings across the city. Around 2,500 people have been shot in Chicago this year, up 9% from last year. Across the country, murders are up 16% over last year. That is according to a recent report from the Council on Criminal Justice. In Washington, it is Democrats versus Democrats as the party tries to pass key bills in just the next few weeks. The biggest, President Biden's social spending plan, which would be the biggest expansion of government support since the New Deal in the 1930s, with a price tag of $3.5 trillion. Moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema say they will not support spending that much. But Senator Bernie Sanders, who played a major role in designing the bill, says $3.5 trillion is the minimum he'll accept.
I have already made, and my colleagues have made, a major compromise going from $6 trillion down to $3.5 trillion.
But Axios reports Manchin wants to put off a vote on the bill until next year. And Congress must also vote soon on raising the government's debt ceiling. Republicans say they will not go along because of the Democrats' huge spending measures. Gordon?
Well, once again, we're in a crisis, both in terms of the debt ceiling and then in terms of can we figure out how to pass a budget. So, you know, you look at these numbers and for Bernie Sanders to say, well, I've already negotiated enough. I've come down from $6 trillion to $3.5 trillion. Well, we don't have the $3.5 trillion to spend. You can't monetize your debt forever. You know, I'm acquainted with the new money theory that the progressives and our government keep touting, that we don't have to worry about deficits anymore. But the last time I checked, inflation was ticking up. And you look at that, and then you're going to come on top of that and spend another $3.5 trillion. You're going to make the world awash in U.S. dollars and, you know, pretend like your debt doesn't exist. Well, when inflation goes up, the Federal Reserve will be forced to act, and they're going to have to raise interest rates. What does that mean? Well, then the interest rate on our own federal debt starts to go up. And so just do the math on what's the interest on 10 trillion, 20 trillion, 30 trillion. And at some point in time, the interest payments on that 30 trillion of debt start to swamp our federal budget, where no longer can we afford basic social programs. And there was a study done by Bank of America a while ago talking about debt. At some point in time, you're not going to be able to fund your military. Well, when that time comes, what happens to America? We've got to get some statesmen looking at a longer picture and not this short term, you know, what have you done for me lately? And I keep saying it, and I'll keep saying it again. You go back in history, 2,500 years, the formation of democracy in Greece. And what happened when the these democracies, the people figured out they could vote themselves the treasury? Well, whenever that happened, they weren't able to pay for a military anymore. And what happened is the democracy went away, and a tyrant, a supposed savior, would come in. If you just give everything to me, I'll take care of it. I'll get the military up and running again, and you won't have to worry about this anymore. Democracies that go bankrupt always turn to tyranny.